So, welcome back to Everything Marketplaces. We talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So, this is episode 124, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Pete Hancock, who's previously the VP of Sales at Yelp. So, Pete initially joined Yelp as an early employee when it was just a scrappy startup and helped build and scale the Yelp sales team to over 2,000 at the later stages and eventually as a public company. So, this is a really great chat with Pete where we got to learn more about his experience at Yelp, learnings and insights from leading sales, how this can translate over to earlier stage marketplaces, and also had a really great group Q&A. So I really enjoyed this conversation, and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Pete, welcome to the group chat. And you and I have been trying to make this happen for a while now. So I'm really excited to have you join us here today. And I would like to start off by saying, huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. So before we jump into all of your awesome experience at Yelp, building, leading, and scaling the sales team, I think it'd be great if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background, though, for those that don't know you.
Sure. My career in tech started in 2006 when I joined Yelp. The company was 20 people, largely just based in San Francisco. I was one of the first salespeople, Series A. So we had raised a Series A before. I joined and we were figuring out how to sell and work with local businesses at the time. I think on the consumer side, we had some good traction at that point. And so we just started to build out a sales team to figure out how to bring businesses onto the platform. I ended up staying at Yelp for 11 years. So all the way through, the IPO, and we went, basically from sub $1 million to 750 million in revenue when I left. And happy to get into, that whole journey and the different roles I had at the company and some of the learnings during that time. And then since then, I've been an advisor and consultant to startups. I found probably the biggest place where I can have an impact is that late seed and Series A stage. So when a company's got a few salespeople starting to scale things out, they're not quite ready to hire a full-time VP of sales and they need an advisor like me. That's where I tend to get involved. But I work with, sort of the earliest stage startups as a mentor, and then as a consultant, get involved kind of around those stages. So that's what I do full time now. And I love doing it. I'm based here in Austin and moved here a couple of years ago.
That's great. It's such a great background. So thanks for sharing with us. So
Sure.
going back to Yelp, though, that's a marketplace, of course, many here I know about, and at such a large sense of scale today. What was it like when you first kind of joined? And then, how does someone become the VP of sales at Yelp?
So when I joined, it was funny. I was living in New York and, I was using this little website called City Search. I don't know if anyone remembers it, but it was an IAC property because, I had moved to New York and I'd lived there for a few years and I was still discovering the city. And of course, I went online to see what I could find out about the city, right? And so, City Search was, it was interesting product, wasn't comprehensive, right? But I was using it. I was reading the Village Voice, if anyone remembers the Village Voice. And after a couple of years, I was like, I've got to go work at a tech company. This was '06, the Google IPO had happened. The dust had settled after the bubble burst in 2001, and I was sort of ready to build a career. So I started poking around at different websites and different properties, and I came across Yelp in the very, very early stages. And I was like, okay, this could be pretty big. This was a great tool. It was definitely better than City Search. So I was looking for, okay, well, are they hiring? And so I messaged them through Craigslist and talked to this guy, Bob Goodson, who was the first product manager at Yelp, working alongside the founders, Jeremy and Russ. And he developed the ad product as a product manager and then was trying to sell it to businesses. So he was building the first, sales team. And I was lucky enough to get hired. I flew out there and joined the team. So I started as an individual contributor selling, and then, moved to a manager role, a director role, and then ultimately VP of sales role, running a large part of the sales work. But yeah, that's how I found myself there. I just wanted to work in tech and found a product that I loved and got the job through Craigslist, and the rest was history.
I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper on some
Hmm.
specific kind of topics. And, going back to Yelp, though, it's a more of a horizontal kind of marketplace, where you have
Hmm.
home services, for instance, and restaurants. So how did that
Hmm.
kind of impact how you first thought about sales and that kind of strategy?
I think the strategy around it being a horizontal marketplace impacted both the consumer acquisition side as well as the supply side. With the businesses. Initially, the real way to attract consumers was in the restaurants category, right? People are dining out multiple times a week. Therefore, there's an opportunity both to write reviews and read reviews multiple times per week. So from a marketplace perspective, you think about it from a frequency of use perspective, and restaurants, you've got a lot of frequency of use there. So when you think about, okay, how do we drive adoption on the consumer side? Restaurants was the clear adoption vehicle for doing so. It drove the most value for people initially from a quantity perspective, right? And so people liked writing reviews about restaurants. So we kind of had better product market fit on the reviewer side, right, which was driving all of the activity. Also, when you think about Yelp, this was sort of the golden age of SEO, right? And so you think about other companies like Zillow who grew through SEO at the time. This was before Google Maps even launched. So people were using Yahoo Maps and MapQuest. So you think about driving content and building out content that can then pull in SEO. Restaurants was really the clear winner for that, both from a search volume perspective on Google and from a recency of content and interesting content. So there's a lot of things around starting with restaurants, but then it expanding beyond restaurants. And what ends up happening is, in some ways, it's almost like a loss leader, right? Where you draw people in through the restaurant content, but the content is really hard to monetize, right? It's really hard to have a restaurant spend money on advertising. It's a really tough business. It's hard to track the value of the advertising for the restaurant, but it brings in a lot of eyeballs from a consumer perspective. Once those eyeballs are there and you start to get other categories like home services, local services, auto repair, and you start to get some valuable review content around those other categories, now you've got a really valuable consumer tool, right? I can find a daycare for my son. There's a ton of value in that. Now, I wouldn't be able to find a daycare if I didn't have all that activity that started with the restaurants, right? Now, from a business perspective, you can start to go in and selling advertising to an auto repair shop, to a plumber, to a painter. There's a clearer ROI on that. So I could go, I mean, we could talk about this for an hour, but you can kind of see how there was a deliberate strategy around restaurants drawing in consumers. And then over time, we started to see on the supply side with the businesses, wow, there's actually a lot of opportunity here with home services, local services. And that became a really important part of the playbook as we got into 2008, 2009, and so on and so forth. Now, home and local services makes up 50% of Yelp's revenue, despite only being maybe 10 or 20% of the overall traffic. So to give you an idea how that has kind of played out over time.
So I'm really interested to learn more as far as, we kind of covered categories a little bit there. But what
Mm-hmm.
as far as when it comes to like go to market and expansion strategy, how does kind of sales align with that?
In some ways, you can almost think about Yelp as the largest freemium model for SMBs of all time. And so all of the SMBs are on Yelp, right? Whether they want to be or not. Now their customers want them to be there, so they're there. And so what ends up happening now is you have all the businesses that are on there, and they're getting business from people finding them on Yelp. They're getting phone calls, they're getting map directions, so on and so forth. So again, you can think about it like a freemium type go-to-market strategy. Then the sales team comes in and they start contacting businesses and say, hey, looks like you've got great reviews. Looks like you're getting a lot of leads from Yelp, which you can see all that on the back end, which is a great thing about working at the team there. And then you say, we have an ad product that you're already getting some business. We can 5X it or whatever that number is through the ad product. And so that was really the go-to-market strategy around that. So when we were looking at, okay, who do we contact? You could have a restaurant that has 1,000 page views, and you can have an auto repair shop that has 50. That auto repair shop that has 50 page views actually might be more interested in advertising because the average customer value is higher, and because they can track the leads more clearly. So they know that they're actually getting business from Yelp because they ask everyone, whereas the restaurant with 1,000 page views doesn't know that. And so when you think about, okay, how do you optimize with this freemium strategy and start selling advertising, you can see where, hey, let's start to optimize around that business owner who both understands that they're already getting business and then is going to be able to track the ROI from the advertising perspective. So it was really a mix of both, but I think you can almost think about it like a freemium type strategy on the supply side for acquiring the businesses, and then layering a sales strategy on top of that, targeted to the businesses that are most likely to convert to the paid product. And the secret is, when you're cold calling into local businesses, when you call the plumber, you're getting their cell phone. They pick up, versus someone at the restaurant who is going to hang up on you. And I mean, I think curation on the supply side for marketplaces is such an important topic, right? And so you think about, if you're building out the supply side, there's some marketplaces that I work with now that are building out the supply side, and you may have a bunch of businesses who want to join that marketplace. They want to be on the supply side. And so you think the product market fit is really strong there because they're converting, right? And they're interested and they're joining. But really the quality and the curation around the supply side is maybe not those businesses who want to join. It's the businesses that deliver more value to the demand side of the marketplace, right? And you think about the early days of OpenTable, and their goal was to get some of the top restaurants in the category. And they were a lot harder to acquire on the supply side, but they drove a lot more value on the demand side. And I've seen that play out again and again with a lot of marketplaces. And when you apply a sales function to acquire supply, sometimes the reason you do that is because curation is really important, and acquiring the right supply drives more value on the demand side. So therefore, having a sales team driving that is more effective than just having it be sort of an open, self-serve marketing type driven strategy.
Yeah, and also too on that, one thing I did want to chat about briefly is the adoption kind of cycle, right? Or I guess you could call it maybe adoption curve. So some of the suppliers kind of a little bit later coming on. So could we maybe chat about that, and from your experience at Yelp, maybe some learnings there?
I mean, sort of what we already talked about, around the restaurants and then the later verticals and things like that. We took a market by market approach to launching Yelp, which is, I think, what a lot of marketplaces do now, but at the time it wasn't actually the accepted strategy, the market by market approach. It was like, let's launch everywhere. And some of our competitors were giving out $5 Starbucks gift cards to get people to write reviews, right? We took the market by market approach, and a lot of that had to do with adoption in a market on the consumer side, on the demand side, before we started to scale up the supply side and convert more of the businesses there. And so happy to dig more into that, but that's one thing that we found, and definitely encourage you guys to check out the Yelp S1. There's a lot of great public information in there about the marketing strategy there for acquiring demand before going in on the supply side.
Yeah, I would actually love to go into that in a little bit more detail if we can.
Sure. If you sort of think about it, you can think about it like a bullseye. And at the center of the bullseye is the Yelp elite reviewer, right? Who writes reviews and writes 2 reviews a day, 1 review a day, every single day, and they love to do it. The job of the community manager was to go in and acquire the center of the bullseye, that Yelp elite member who's going to go and write reviews every single day. So the way that we did that was through a street marketing team. So we would hire someone locally in the city of Seattle who knew a lot of people, and their job was to go out and acquire Yelp elite reviewers, right? Writing reviews. They were the center of the bullseye. And then over time, they would tell people about it. They would, talk about Yelp. Oh, how'd you find this brunch place? Oh, I found it on Yelp. Oh, you should check it out. So there's a lot of word of mouth that would get created through that center of the bullseye. That center of the bullseye also was creating the 90% of the content, which was then getting indexed in the search results, which was then driving the SEO acquisition. So the community management team, the street marketing team, if you will, was a really innovative approach to acquiring the demand side for Yelp, I think we were one of the first websites ever to actually have parties where people met in person. The common wisdom at the time was you don't meet people that you met on the internet, right? And we kind of, flipped that on its head and had parties. So that was a really key part to the overall strategy, but also the marketing strategy, the community management strategy. The idea of a community manager was completely innovative. Yelp was one of the first companies to ever have them and was critical to the company's overall success. So I think that innovation on the go-to-market side is really important in marketplaces, in addition to the product innovation.
Yeah, certainly. I agree on that note. So it sounds like you had quite a bit of interface, with the not only product but kind of marketing, and even probably customer support, internally. So how was the kind of org structure, and maybe how did that kind of change as you scaled up at Yelp?
One of the advantages of it being a 20-person company is we were all on the same floor, right? And so everyone was just there. We were at 650 Mission Street, in one building. And you can imagine, as a salesperson, making cold calls into businesses and having Jeremy, right next to you, the CEO, is pretty intimidating, but you learned how to do it and you got to know everyone, right? And we got to see that market by market approach play out. And it was such a small company that when we had the parties in San Francisco, the community manager parties, everyone would go. I mean, it was like a work event, and I'd be handing out drinks and chatting with elite members and getting them food, and that was just something that everyone did, right? And so it was just a part of the job. It was a small company. Of course, over time, that changed. I think particularly even in the early days, we had to segment out the sales team at Yelp from the user-facing team, because there was always this concern around the reviews, right? And the ad product, and that somehow those two things would get conflated. And in order to maintain integrity, the sales team couldn't even talk to the customer support team. It was like a separation of church and state. So that was something that we had to put in place pretty early on at Yelp to make sure that the businesses didn't think you could pay to play on the review side. And there's still, misinformation about that, but that was a key part of the org structure. But, I think ultimately, probably the best insight that I can give you around the org structure here is we had the community management team completely focused on the community. Their job was to grow the community, grow the center of the bullseye, grow the user base, grow the demand side, period. They were not focused on the revenue side at all, right? If they would have said, maybe we should start to get our community to write more reviews for auto repair shops, I don't think the community would have really liked that, right? It wouldn't have attracted the right members. Maybe it would have helped from a revenue perspective in the short term, but it wasn't the right long-term play. So I think, having the community management team focus on the users, focus on the demand side, and then having the sales team wholly focused on the supply side and converting that into paid advertising accounts was a key part of the work structure, and not, kind of conflating the metrics of each group. So ultimately it became a huge company. We had a huge marketing team, a huge sales team. I mean, at one point there was probably almost 2,000 sales reps across the United States. So it was a huge undertaking. But some insights there on the work structure, and it was a great run, and real thankful to be there in the early days when I got to kind of have insights into the whole business just through osmosis.
That's pretty incredible to hear about stories, going from 20 people in a room to 2,000 on a team. So
yeah.
So on that note, we have primarily earlier stage marketplace kind of founders and teams here in the community. Some I would say even pre-product market fit. But for those here that are thinking about sales and essentially kind of building that kind of initial sales playbook from scratch. I know this is quite a broad topic, and this could be an entire group chat itself on that. But could you maybe use an example of an earlier stage marketplace, maybe even one that you've worked with, and how that kind of playbook has looked like for building out sales?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think you had Cody from Bounce, it's luggage storage, and they're actually layering on some really interesting new products as well. And they've done incredibly well as far as growing, both on the consumer side and then on the business side. I mean, I think one of their key advantages is they have more partners for luggage storage than any other any of their competitors, and so it's just a better experience for the consumer, right? When you've got that liquidity. in the marketplace. And I think without giving too much away around their playbook, which has worked incredibly well, one of the things you want to think about, like, okay, do I need a sales team? Like, do I need a sales team? Do I need one or not? And I like to think about a sales team as just simply inserting a human being into some part of the funnel. Simple as that. And so you've got a funnel on the supply side, you've got a funnel on the demand side, and you're like, does it make sense to insert a human being at a certain point within this funnel, right? And in some cases, when you think about on the supply side, if you're acquiring SMBs, it's really difficult to market to SMBs, right? The value of acquiring an SMB may not be a ton, so you don't have a lot of dollars to throw around at paid marketing. They're notoriously tough to market to as far as to get their attention, right? If I'm running a hotel or a restaurant, like, how do I market to that person? I guess I could go to a conference maybe and try and get in front of a lot of them. It's really expensive, and that's basically a sales thing anyway, right? It's not a sort of a scalable paid marketing solution. So you think about the sales funnel. Well, in that case, hey, maybe from an awareness perspective or a marketing perspective, having a human being contact these businesses directly is more efficient than trying to do paid marketing or trying to do, any sort of non-sales, focused strategy, right? You may find that from a conversion funnel perspective, having a human being at the conversion point to do a call and walk them through, it's economically, it just makes more sense. The conversion rates are higher. We convert more of the right sort of supply. You can think about, I think one of the interesting things about marketplaces is onboarding and operations, right? There's always this sort of onboarding. There's always this operationally heavy, sometimes part to either the one or both sides of the marketplace. Well, if you're going to have a human being involved in operations and onboarding, why not have that person actually do some sales as well? And then part of their job is to do the onboarding call or to onboard the person, right? You could have that person do both. And then finally, retention, right? So if you're looking at that part of the funnel, do you find that businesses or the supply side or whatever side of the marketplace, do you find that retention is a lot better if they've had that human experience, right? If they've had that connection with a person. So you basically think about it as, I would build a landing page, right? Where they can put in their information and say, I'm interested in signing up, right? For one or both sides of the marketplace. And now you have a base case that's essentially self-serve, even if it's not, even if you still have to manually do it. And then you can start to think about like, okay, should I insert a human being at some point of this funnel? Is it at the top of the funnel? Is it at the middle? Is it at the end? And that's how I think about sales teams specifically. I mean, you can think about the driver acquisition team for Uber. Were they a sales team? I mean, they were convincing people to become drivers for Uber, and they were spending tons and tons of money, and they were doing that through one-on-one conversations and meeting the drivers in person. Right. So were they a sales team? Were they a growth team? I don't know, but you were inserting a human being at a certain part of the funnel for one or both sides of the marketplace. And that's how I like to think about sales teams generally. You tend to find sales teams with these sort of more higher velocity. So you're not going to have some enterprise salesperson who's making 500K or something like that, right? For a marketplace type business, that's less common. You're going to have more of a higher velocity sales team, more of a partnerships team that's doing, higher velocity acquisition. That's what I tend to see with most marketplaces. And lots of them have made it work pretty well for themselves.
Yeah, that's really great breakdown as far as, inserting the human there, to kind of do the manual and the funnels and whatnot. But as far as when it comes to the channels, so what are the primary channels that you're seeing that are effective for early stage marketplaces?
It's interesting. I think it changes. I think I've definitely seen a decrease in effectiveness of cold email, as far as automated email and using that to acquire supply. I mean, it's still cheap to do. And so you can still do it, right? But, I talked to a lot of early stage marketplace founders who are just like, I'm trying to do this. And, it's not working, or I'm not getting as much as I want, or what have you. And yeah, it's because everyone's overloaded, with emails. And so, I do think that there is value in getting in front of the supply side. If you have on the supply side, you're acquiring businesses and you need a sales team, I do think there is value in getting in front of them in person in the early stages. I think you can learn a lot by meeting them one by one. And so I have seen a little bit of a return to outside sales or partnership teams actually, landing in a market and hitting the streets and doing that, both as a way to learn about partners, but as a way to just cut through the noise of all of the cold calling and cold emailing and cold LinkedIn messages that people are seeing. Now, it's obviously more expensive, right, to do that. But at the end of the day, the goal is not to optimize for the cheapest thing in the early stage. It's to find something that actually works. And so, keep experimenting and find something that works, and then you can kind of iterate from there. So, definitely challenges with email, and definitely seeing a little bit more of a return to getting in front of, the partners in person, when you can do it, is some things I'm seeing lately.
Yeah. So you mentioned as far as, finding something that works, right? And if we kind of go back and we say, hey, we're like an earlier stage marketplace and we're kind of channel testing and, and testing our funnels and this, really refining, even our value prop, what are some kind of signals to where you would think about, okay, this is something to actually, focus on and really double down on?
Am I getting any inbound leads? And, what are they? So I think having that landing page, having that baseline case where you always have it there, and you can always see like how many people are hitting that page, how many people are coming through, what type of leads are coming through this, through this channel. As an example, an interesting story is in the early days at Yelp. First off, we had a self-serve business at Yelp, and that thing was built, and for years no businesses signed up for it. I mean, we had, dozens of millions of dollars in revenue, like the company, and we had the self-serve funnel and people knew what Yelp was, but SMBs just, they wouldn't use it, right? They needed that hand holding. And what we found though, which was interesting, was the one thing that came through that self-serve channel a lot was these like agencies and these resellers. And I really wish we would have built on that business a little bit sooner. Now, Yelp has a huge channel business now through agencies and resellers. But I think that was an example of an interesting learning where maybe we could have found a way to partner with some of those companies a little bit earlier because we saw them coming through the inbound funnel, right? But yeah, I think building that landing page, building that funnel, and figuring out what that looks like is really important to give you a base case of what types of leads are you getting, and what are people finding out there, and then you can kind of lean on that. But I think it really depends on the company. Generally, I think most people, curation is really important, as I mentioned previously with marketplaces. And so you want to talk directly to the most important suppliers, right, on the supply side, and figure out like, okay, how strong is your product market fit with them, and what feedback are you getting from them? That's the thing that I would be testing for on the when I'm testing my different channels, right? Is not only is it effective, but is it acquiring, the right type of, the quality, not just the quantity. Because I think in the early stages, yes, you need to get liquidity, you need to get some quantity and figure that out. But at the end of the day, you are going to need to get quality. And so I guess my point is, if you're going to double down and invest on a channel, make sure that that channel can not just drive quantity, but actually drives quality as well. And so the best way to do that is just to talk directly to the businesses.
When you say measure quality, are you using some kind of I would say like metrics to, marketplace metrics to help measure that, or is this?
It'll depend on the marketplace, right? But as we all know, if you're acquiring supply, it's all about, what's the supply that's going to drive a lot of demand or drive a lot of conversion on the demand side. And so, if it's Airbnb, what are the, what's that beautiful apartment on the Ile Saint Louis in Paris, right? The first time I used Airbnb in the early stages, I couldn't believe I got to stay on the Ile Saint Louis for $90, a night, right? I mean, that quality of on the supply side, made me a consumer of Airbnb for life, right? And so, I think is there a metric around that? Sure. I mean, the conversion rate's going to be a lot higher, for that one when you have it on there, right? But it's also like put yourself in the shoes of the consumer on that side, and you have an idea of what you're looking for. Certainly on the SEO side, right? You're thinking about, Airbnb didn't necessarily have an SEO strategy, but let's say they did. There's probably a lot of searches for, apartment for rent on the Ile Saint Louis or the Ile de la Cité, or whatever. And so, there's metrics around that, right? That you could be thinking about. So I think it depends on the marketplace, but yeah, when you see it.
Yeah, that's a really great point of, just also reminding yourself to put yourself in the shoes of your users. So
totally. Yeah.
So we're going to get into group questions here in a little bit. Otherwise, you and I
Cool.
can just keep chatting through things here. But one, I did actually have a question for you, and that's, what are some of the biggest, I would say, mistakes or maybe misconceptions about sales for early stage marketplaces specifically that you've seen?
Outsourcing sales, I think, is a huge mistake. You see that a lot. Listen, there's definitely a time and place for, outsourcing it, right? And I talk to, mainly my work with very, very early stages on the mentorship side, and doing sort of office hours calls. And, I get this question all the time. Hey, can I just outsource, my lead gen or what have you? Can I just hire a team to send a bunch of emails and so on and so forth? And at the end of the day, I think, talking to, one or both sides of your marketplace and acquiring one or both sides of your marketplace, unfortunately, it's a core competency of your company, right? You have to be great at it. And so the idea that you would outsource a core competency, generally, I think is a mistake. And, I think it's very tempting, right? You're like, okay, well, I'm not that great at sales. I'm not that great at, writing emails. I'm not that great at doing outreach. I've never made a cold call in my life. I can't show up and visit a business in person and convince them to join my marketplace. Well, so what? You got to figure out how to do it, because you can't outsource anything unless you know how to do it yourself. Now, if you're able to figure out how to do it and build a little bit of a playbook, sure, then go ahead and outsource it. But you can't figure out an agency, to figure out. I mean, when you think about sales, you got the sales process and you've got the messaging, right? You can't have an agency figure out your sales process and your messaging for you. You as the founder, you as an internal early employee need to figure that out. And then maybe once you figured that out, then you could outsource it to a lead gen company or something like that. So I get that question a lot. I think it's a mistake to try and outsource things too early. There's definitely a time and place for it, but if it's going to be a core competency, figure out how to do it yourself and then go from there is my advice to founders. Sadly.
Oh no, that's so great. I was just smiling over here. I was like, okay, thankfully you're saying this and it's not just me all the time in the community. So I can take that as a
yeah, I guess I'm talking my book, because I like to do it. But at the end of the day, I think I mean, you got to get comfortable with the sales conversations and listen, I think in a marketplace, the advantage is it really should be viewed as a partnership, right? And you're looking for, the right partners for the marketplace. And so I think those conversations, founders are pretty good at those conversations. Like they believe in what they're building. They believe in the value that they're creating by building the marketplace. And so, don't underestimate your ability to have those conversations with potential partners. And I recommend taking it head on versus outsourcing it early on.
Awesome. Hey, Olivia, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Mike. And thanks so much, Pete, for sharing your insights. Super interesting to see, kind of how you started as employee number 20 and then grew the team all the way up to 2,000 employees. So I was just kind of curious about one thing that you mentioned around talking about community managers and kind of, having a team grow at a market for a year before your team came in and started driving ads. So curious to see kind of, how you incentivize those, like finding those elite members and how you kind of incentivize the behavior that you wanted to see. Like what types of incentives did you use? So yeah, kind of curious if you could maybe speak a little bit to that.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, the community management team was one of the big innovations that I think really drove a lot of success at Yelp. And I mean, if you think about it, in theory, it sounds expensive, right? We're going to hire a person in every single market to acquire users of our product, right? The whole idea of like, we're going to hire someone and they're going to acquire users. Like, I thought this was a website. Like, what's that all about? But I think what we were able to track very closely was basically that playbook, right? And understand, okay, if we put a community manager in this market, this is how many more users we're going to acquire in that market. And we are able to see that and track that and understand what behaviors and what KPIs that person should have. So we were able to track that pretty closely. And, that was part of the market by market approach where we kind of stumbled upon the idea. In the early days, the first community manager, Nish Nataraja, he was the first marketing person at Yelp, and he had experience in street level marketing. And so, they were just like, hey, let's go talk to these people who are writing reviews. And they started talking to them and having these parties and getting people together. And they just started to see the community grow. So they kind of stumbled upon it and then found out, okay, well, what are the activities that these people should be doing, and how can we sort of turn this into a playbook that we can launch in each market? A couple key things that were key in that case were, one, acquiring the center of the bullseye, so focusing time on that. So the key KPI there was something along the lines of whatever the metric was to define the center of the bullseye. So I think it was someone who maybe wrote a review once a week or 2 reviews a week or something along those lines was a key metric. So looking for people who did that and acquiring that and keeping them focused on that, not the overall user base growth, which you would think would be their job, right? But it was actually, no, let's acquire these people who are super active. So that was really important. One of the key things they did is they had a party once a month, and they got everyone together, and each of those elite members had a +1. So they would invite someone to the party, which would then naturally grow the community. The +1 idea was genius, and it really worked. And so, organizing and throwing that party once a month, and then all the online behaviors that drove the party. So the before, during, and the after. So the posting of the event, the talking on the talk boards around it, all the communication afterwards, those things were key. And then there was key behaviors that they were doing online. So messaging people directly as well. So it wasn't just offline. They were messaging people directly. They were engaging with people's reviews. So Yelp you could vote for a review as useful, funny, or cool. So it was sort of the Facebook like button before the like button existed. So they were really active on the platform as well. And they were modeling what the behavior should be like. So they were modeling what a Yelp elite member should be doing, right? So they were writing a review every single day, and they were writing quality reviews, not just short reviews, and they were posting pictures and doing all those kind of things. So that's kind of how they spent their time. If we were to create the role today, it might be a little bit different. But I think the key thing was really understanding the center of the bullseye and focusing on that and keeping them focused on that versus, all these other metrics that they could be thinking about. Yeah, lots to talk about there. I actually think Nish did a post. Mike, maybe we can dig it up and find it and link it. I think Nish did a post on the early days about the community management team. Super interesting. So we'll find that one and link to it for you guys.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. It's really cool to hear the stories, and learnings from the early days. So we'll definitely try to find a link to that and share it in the community after. So cool. Well, Pete, this is such a great chat. We're almost out of time here, so I definitely want to be conscious of that. But before we kind of wrap things up here, since we have a lot here in the community that are earlier stage marketplace founders and teams, as I mentioned, do you have a few kind of like last parting tips that you might like to share with us here?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, I think we covered a lot of the big things today. About thinking about your funnel holistically, right? And thinking about, where to do it, doing sales yourself before outsourcing it and before, hiring anyone. Um, I guess the last thing that I leave you with is, find true believers, in the early days on your sales team. I think that was really important, for us. I grew up only going to locally owned businesses. My mom used to say, like, we can't go to that restaurant, it's a chain, like as a kid. And so I was a true believer in leveling the playing field for locally owned businesses. So, it was not easy doing sales at Yelp in the early days. No one knew who we were. We started every cold call with "it's like help, but with a Y." I mean, it was brutal, like just getting hung up on. I mean, we would call these businesses and they didn't have a computer. So we would have to print out the reviews and fax them to them. This is what your Yelp page looks like, and like fax it to people. So, I would say, like, it was really important in the early days, and particularly in marketplaces where if you are going to have a sales team, they have to be a true believer. They have to believe in the value of the marketplace. They have to be focused on bringing on the quality, businesses if you're bringing businesses on. So find people who have those shared values. Don't compromise, with your sales team just because you think you need to hire some sort of sales killer or something like that. Like, they should still be mission focused. I think that's really important, and we found that to be really important in the early days as well at Yelp.
That's really great. So it's a great way to wrap things up here. So, once again, we really appreciate, taking the time to join us here today. And last but not least, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at?
Yeah, you can check out my website, petehancock.me. I've got a little bit of information as far as what I do on the consulting side. And then you'll primarily find me on LinkedIn, since I'm in sales. Salespeople, I think they just live and breathe on LinkedIn all day. So I like to be active there and help the sales community there. So find me on LinkedIn. It's just Pete Hancock on LinkedIn, and always happy to chat with people and, have calls and see where I can help. So feel free to reach out anytime.